Hi, I'm James. This is Games according to Jaymz. Forgive me, I am trying to record this with my phone, as my normal way of doing the podcast has been interrupted with more people at home and everything going on with the current pandemic, COVID-19. I'm sure all of you know. This episode is about old school video gaming. Now, some of you out there who are listening to this, if you're listening to this, might think, oh, old school video gaming, PlayStation 1, Sega Genesis. No. Some of you of my generation may remember this and may not even go back that far, but I'm talking way back in the day. I'm talking even pre-Atari 2600 of the early 80s old school gaming. And we'll go through some of that too. Now, in my case, I am not what I would call an avid video gamer. I do not really play video games anymore, and I haven't probably since, I'd say, the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo era. That was kind of my swan song when it came to playing video games on a regular basis. That said, I still do play the odd game. My son and I will play EA Sports NHL series. Occasionally, I'll play a game of Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, whatever the new versions are. By the way, I'm still really good at Street Fighter. But yeah, I'm not a what you would call a avid video gamer. I used to be back in the day, when it was the Atari and the Nintendo and the Sega. I used to play all kinds of games on those systems. But I do date back to a time when it was Pong. It was just a stick on each side of the screen, and you would knock back a square, quote-unquote, ball, and it would go back and forth, basically tennis. We had a deluxe Pong, which would set up barriers, so the things, you'd have to try to get them around the barriers to against the other person, or you'd be both on one side and knocking it off the other wall, like handball. And that was the extent of home video game back in the late 70s. That said, Atari came along, and at the time, the only time you could play any really good video games would be at a pizza parlor, or some convenience stores might have one in there, or the age-old arcade. I know arcades are not really a thing anymore, mainly because they start charging like $1 a game here and there. But back in the early 80s through at least to the early mid 90s, most malls had an arcade, or there was standalone arcades, and you could go in and just keep plugging quarters in until bankrupt yourself if you weren't careful. Like, for a kid, $10. If you weren't any good at games, you could be out of there within the hour. And if you were good at games, you could be there for a week. God only knows. But yeah, back then, like, if you wanted to play video games, you had to go to an off-site. You couldn't stay home. You had to go somewhere, and you better have money, because you ain't playing for free. I've spent many a time spending hours at an arcade. I used to go play games on my break, even when I was working at Sears back in the early 90s. And we'd have a half-hour break, so I'd grab a burger at the food court, then go play a video game for 15 minutes or whatever, and pick games I know, this will take about 15 minutes, and I'd go play that. But throughout the 80s, yeah, the games were not what they are today, not even close. I remember getting Pac-Man when I first got my Atari, the original Pac-Man for Atari, and looking at it, and just, even then you kind of shake your head and go, like, this is really cool that I can play Pac-Man on my Atari, but holy crap, this is not Pac-Man. It just looked kind of that bad, right? Now they refined things, obviously, but I used to love going to the arcade just because the graphics were better, the gameplay was smoother. Like, they didn't really have Street Fighter or a lot of the games we would think of, or younger people would think of, when it came to games in the arcade. A lot of them were side scrollers, which I think there are still some today, but it's not a game generally made now. It's usually a first-person shooter or something along those lines. Or they were things like racing games, and that dominated. Like the big thing in the early 80s for arcade games was Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders. Like Adam Sandler did a movie a few years ago. I can't remember the name offhand. That was based around those games. So you had Qbert in there as well. And these are games that were, while they didn't take tactics per se, they were still difficult in their own way, because there's one of the biggest differences between video games of then and video games of now is the vast majority of video games today have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There is an end point. There's an end point to the story. There's an end point to the mission. There's an end point. Whatever there is a final goal to the vast majority of games today. Be it, I don't know, playing for the Stanley Cup to finish a season, or, winning the Super Bowl, or whatever it is for the sports games. In fighting games, there's always a story. So unless you're just fighting each other for fun, you're fighting through, you fight all the different opponents to the final boss, and then the game's over, they tell you the story. So there's always a beginning, a middle, and end in some way. That ultimate goal, and then you've completed the game. And I think that's one of the things I miss about old school gaming. A game like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Space Invaders, Missile Command, these old games didn't have an end. They just got fast. The game itself would just get faster and faster and faster, more difficult, harder. And it would just get harder and harder and harder to clear a level. And I miss that. I really do. Because it's hard to explain, I guess. I don't know. I just miss the fact that you could keep playing it, and the real goal in those old games was to beat yourself. Get further than you did previously. Get further than your friend did. Get further than the person who has the high score on the machine at the arcade. That was like a badge of honor. Like, oh yeah, I've got high score on whatever game, or I held high score on whatever game for X amount of time. That was a badge of honor for people who were regulars at an arcade. That's no longer the case. While there's still high scores on some games, it's still a matter of, well, yeah, I beat that game without losing a round, or I only lost 1 or 2 rounds in the final boss rounds before beating it, or whatever. The high score is irrelevant by and large for most games today, because most games today, as I said, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And Atari, ColecoVision, which was the more arcade-like game but significantly more expensive, therefore didn't do as well. Atari was the affordable version. They carried on that kind of, I don't know if I'm going to call it a tradition, but that pattern. By and large, the games on those consoles in the early to mid 80s followed the arcade pattern. The games would just get more difficult, more difficult, more difficult, faster, 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 and you had to basically be faster, 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 better, better, better to win the game, or, well, to play as long as possible. And that really was the goal. Now, obviously, they had other games on these systems. Like Atari had bowling, and Atari had hockey, and they had racing games and other sports games, which obviously have to have an ending to the game itself. And that was just it. Like it would be set for time. Bowling would be 10 frames. Tennis would be whoever gets to 5 games or 6 games first, or whatever it was. Decathlon had 10 events. You would just do the 10 events and see how well you did. Point being to get more points than your opponent, or to just run through it yourself as best you can. But again, there was beginning, middle, and end. But they made a lot of games that were essentially the same as games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Space Invaders, where you just keep playing and playing and playing until finally you couldn't continue. You would just be finally done. There was a lot of those back then. The arcade was full of them. And then later 80s is when developers started creating games that were, I don't want to say story driven. They weren't story driven, but they had a background story to them. Games like the first arcade game for RoboCop. Well, it's based on the movie, so there's obviously kind of a story there to go through. Never beat it. Did pretty well at it, but I never beat it. And the game was fun. It was a side scroller and had all these different things you could do. And other games started to come out in the late 80s into the early 90s as well in the arcades. Not quite first-person shooters, but they were set up so that you did have, it was sort of a simulation where, like I said, a sort of first-person shooter. It wasn't quite the same because you weren't moving the person. You were aiming and firing because they would have a proxy weapon there for you to use and aim and shoot like any light gun, similar to, say, Duck Hunt, but you didn't have the freedom of motion for some of them. But there was a story to it as well. Like there's a Terminator one, and there's a few others too. There was Time Cop and a few other things. And those games were fun too, don't get me wrong, but I don't know. And then some of the sports games came out, and you had to pay for time. Like you'd put a quarter in, it would only give you 2 minutes to play. That's it. And you had to keep feeding quarters to keep playing the game. Other games would do something similar, but you had to, there was games like that earlier on too, like pole position, which was a racing game. And you had to finish the lap in under a certain amount of time to get an extension on your time and try to finish the race. So it did encourage being better and better and better in order to finish that particular 10 lap race or whatever it was. But games like the hockey game, Blades of Steel, there was a NBA game. I can't remember quite offhand what it was called. There was also Tecmo Bowl. Some sports games that would have periods or quarters or halves or whatever you want to call them. You literally had to just keep feeding the machine in order to complete a game. And that's where my interests in some games started to wane. I'm like, okay, I'm paying money. If I'm good enough to keep winning the game or whatever, I should be able to keep playing without having to keep feeding just to get an extra 2 minutes or an extra 5 minutes or whatever it was. It should be about, if you're good at the game, you play the game. And that was the thing there. And same thing happened with some of the pseudo first-person shooters like Terminator and Time Cop. You had X amount of time to do certain things. Now, there are ways to get time extensions, but generally speaking, you had to turn around and go and just put more money in to keep going. And that's just the way it was. I will say the advent of the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, in North America very much boosted home video gaming. It was relatively affordable. It wasn't cheap, but it was relatively affordable by a number of people. And it really expanded the home video game experience. Now, I didn't get one for a few years, but I did end up getting one, and there were a lot of games. I wasn't a Super Mario guy, but I liked playing Blades of Steel on that because you could actually play the full game. There was a game, I think, Double Dribble. That was fun because it was basketball, but you didn't have to worry, oh well, I want this team because it's better than this team. They were all rated pretty evenly, and they had neat graphics for doing slam dunks, and it did take a little skill to get in the right spot to do three-point shots and things like that. The football was iffy, but it was okay. But that's when games like Castlevania started coming out as well, at least in North America. Japan was always ahead of the curve when it came to video games, but in North America, games like Castlevania came out. Super Mario, I know people love it. I was never a big fan of it. But like the games like the Castlevania games, and there was Track and Field 2, which I enjoyed because that took some kind of skill to pull off a lot of the times for some of the stuff you needed to do. And it expand what you could do because of the nature of the controllers. They had more buttons. It had two buttons. It had a directional pad instead of a joystick, your start and your select buttons. So there was more to it in your hands rather than on the console. The console was just, you turn the console on. That was about it. Whereas older systems, a lot of these toggles and switches and things were on the system. And that was more to set up difficulty of game or whatever you want to call it. But adding an extra button allowed you to do other things. Like, while running, you could jump. While running, you could jump and shoot while in the air, where older systems, you couldn't do that just because of the way the controllers were designed. And it saw I want to call it a bit of a revolution in North America. Again, not necessarily in Japan, or in, possibly anywhere in Asia, but definitely Canada and the US saw an evolution in home gaming that started to see the arcade wane. When the systems you could have at home, be it the NES and the Sega Master System, which was their first foray alongside the NES. Personally, I was a Master System. I preferred the Master System, but it was more expensive, so I ended up with an NES. But when you can buy a system at $200 or whatever it was at the time, and games were still pricey then too. Like, anybody complaining about, well, I paid $80 for a game. I was paying $50 to $60 for an Atari game back in 1983, guys. So trust me, it's not really any worse now than it was then. But anyway, those systems came out and their graphics were on par with a lot of the games in the arcade. So why would you go to the arcade to stand there when you can sit in the comfort of your own home in a chair with your controller in your hand, play games that were probably maybe not as good, but certainly looked as good in many cases. And you could get home versions of a lot of games too. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed my NES. I had it for the better part of, I want to say, 15 years before I finally got rid of it. I gave it to a friend of my son. They didn't have a video game system. Like, well, it's just really collecting dust for us right now. So, because we had a Sega Genesis as well, which we played way more of anyway. So we gave it to them. It was like, it works. Everything's good. Carry on. But yeah, like the NES and then the Sega Genesis. I had a Super Nintendo at one point, but I switched to Genesis instead just because a variety of games was better. Super Nintendo's about the time Nintendo veered more towards family friendly, while Sega Genesis kept going with more of the violent games and such. But at that point when the arcade started to wane, which is kind of sad. I still went to an arcade for a while, once in a while, if I had the chance. But that's at the point where even I was getting to the point of, you know what, I'm happy with my Sega Genesis, but it is what it is, right? So, and Sega and CD and stuff too, and then you had the PS1 came out, and then the Sega's, I think it was the Saturn came out, and at that point, and you had the GameCube came out, and I was just like, you know what, I can't keep up anymore. I'm happy playing what I've got. I'll buy more games for what I've got. I'm thrilled, and that's basically where I made the break from video gaming. I was also starting to get more into tabletop role-playing games. I was playing BattleTech. Not right around that time as well as when I got married and had my first daughter. And while I still played a lot of video games on my older system, I didn't have an interest in the newer stuff. And I'll say, the stuff looks gorgeous. Even PS1, PS2 games looked really, really good for the time. I remember a friend of mine bought a PS2 and I think he was playing SOCOM or something. He's like, oh, you got to see this. And he's showing me SOCOM and all this. This is right around the time, post 9/11, when the U.S. had invaded Afghanistan, and there was news every day on CNN, and every channel you could think of had footage from the war zones, et cetera, et cetera. So he's showing me SOCOM, and all I could think was, looks great, if I want to see this, I'll watch CNN. I really have no interest in playing this. I had zero. And yeah, so mid 90s is about where my video game interests waned, except for playing newer versions of like EA Sports NHL series. Some of the Madden football stuff at the time too. Um, and my son and I, again, we still play NHL. I think we have NHL 19 upstairs, so we play that on occasion. But yeah, that to me, that's what old school gaming was: Pong, Pac-Man, Missile Command, Space Invaders, uh, pinball. That was another thing. I used to love playing pinball. I can't remember how much. I could not tell you how much money I wasted playing pinball back in the day. It was just insane. Even now, I'll throw a loonie in a pinball machine once in a while if I happen to be around one, which is quite rare. But to me, that was old school quote unquote video gaming, was pinball machines, Pac-Man. Yeah, I keep saying Pac-Man because it's like considered one of the ultimate grandfather of video game titles out there. But yes, so to me, I miss that time. I really do when it comes to video games, because everything now is like, I look at a PS controller or an Xbox controller and go, why do you need 15 buttons? Why do you need that much crap on a controller to do stuff when I was having just as much fun with a stick and a button on my Atari? And that's the part I think that's the part that kind of just got me on the downside. Is like, man, it doesn't need to be that complicated. It really doesn't. I get the fact people want more of that, and to each their own. And yeah, it makes me old and nostalgic, and I fully admit that. But I was never, for instance, a PC gamer. I played some back in the 80s as well, like King's Quest and Test Drive when they first came out on PC or whatever it was, PC Junior, PC2, whatever the IBM computers were at the time. But it was just, even those games were simpler. It was like there's a couple simple commands and away you went. And then the more games that came out, okay, well, you need to use all these keys and this and that. And it's like, man, I just want to throw down. I really don't. I just want to grab the controller and play. I don't want to have to worry about, oh, I have to hit this key, and this key to do that. It's probably why the only PC games I ever really enjoyed were the X-Wing simulator games, because you had your flight stick, a trigger, and it was maybe 4 or 5 keys tops for changing speeds and changing targets. Once you've destroyed an opponent, there was a key you hit, it would lock onto it would basically tag the next opponent you should go after. That's about as far as I went. I was never much of a first-person shooter. Not that I don't enjoy playing it once in a while. I had Unreal Tournament. I never played the game. I always went into test mode just because I just want to go around. It was more of a stress reliever than anything else. I would just hop in the game, set up test mode with a bunch of bots, and then just run around for 20 minutes and see how many kills I could get. So I don't mind that either, and it's simple enough. But to me, yeah, I miss the days of the Atari and the Nintendo Entertainment System and arcades and I guess the simplicity of it all. I think the advent of online gaming is both great and not so great. So I'll address that too before I wrap up here. That being able to play online with people around the world is such an awesome thing on its own. You can play somebody in Zimbabwe, if you can play somebody in Argentina, you could be playing somebody in Tokyo, Japan, you could be playing somebody in India, Australia, it doesn't matter. That to me is, on the face of it, awesome. Unfortunately, on the other side though, it also shows a very diminished, what's the word I'm looking for? It's you don't see friends getting together and having video game parties. Let's put it that way. I don't hear of people doing it anymore. And it used to be something my buddies and I used to do all the time. It's like, oh, we're going over to so-and-so's place to play video games. All right, well, I'll bring this, this, and this. You're bringing that. Okay, cool. And that'd be a day of video game playing, video game playing Coke and chips or Pepsi and chips or whatever. And we'd all bring, because we all usually had the same systems. So we'd bring what games we had so that it created this pool of games that everybody could play, even if they didn't have them, because we all had similar systems. And I think that, unfortunately, is the negative side effect of the online, both PC and console, video gaming experience. You're not hanging out together in person. And I really enjoyed that when I was young, like a kid. Like 3 or 4 of us would just get together for the afternoon, play video games for 4 or 5 hours, and that would be it. So while it is awesome, there is that other side of it where kids don't socially interact in person anymore. And that was one of the things that was great about it at the time. The arcade, same thing. You and your buddies go to the arcade, and, oh, I'm going to go play this, or I'm going to go play that, or hey, let's team up and play this. And because a lot of them had 2-player options. So and especially when games like Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat came out, your buddies could get together, and you and your buddies could get together and play, and you could be king of Mortal Kombat over your circle of friends, because you would each do fights against each other, and the winner would be basically the champion among your friends. And we used to do that with Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and the sports games. We'd play off against each other and would be like, okay, I'm the champion of this because I beat all of you or whatever. And you don't see that anymore because you can do it online, and you don't have to leave. You don't have to go anywhere. And I think that's a lost part of video gaming today as well. But anyway, I'll wrap up. It's been almost 30 minutes, and I've probably rambled and talked fairly quickly in some spots. And hopefully this recorded well, and you guys enjoyed my little foray into the past of what I call kind of the golden age of video gaming, because it was for me, which would have been late 70s to mid 90s. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. And if this works out, then I'll probably do another episode in 2 or 3 weeks to kind of get back on the schedule we were on. So I hope everyone is safe during this time, practicing your social distancing and all that stuff, and washing your hands, etc. And eventually, hopefully, we'll get through this, and life will get to relative normal. But yeah, so I'm James. This has been Games According to James, and thanks for listening.